This is an interview with Mrs. Sheyann Webb Christburg from Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley, I'm presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Today is January 29th, 1998. Ms. Christburg, I would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule from Alabama State, driving all the way to Birmingham to come sit and talk with me today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Welcome to Birmingham. Look, I just want to start by asking you some general questions about your family. Your mother and father, were they originally from Selma?
Yes, both parents were from Selma. They were born and raised in Selma. There was a little town outside of Selma called Tyler, Alabama. And that's basically where my father was born and raised. And of course, my mom was in the area of Tyler and in between the town of Selma. So primarily they were born and raised in the Selma area.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I had 8 brothers and sisters. I had a brother to pass, and now, of course, there's 7 of us.
Where did you fit in there? Were you the youngest, the oldest?
I'm the knee baby.
You're the knee baby.
I'm the baby girl, and I have a baby brother.
Okay. So there are 2 younger, 1 younger than you.
Yes, my baby brother, 1 young.
Okay. All right. We had to get that knee baby together. Yeah. What I'm attempting to do is just to get a picture of what it was like growing up in Selma. Let me ask you about your mother and father. What about their education? How much education did they have?
My parents were not as fortunate as some of us to have had the opportunity to finish high school or even go to college. However, my father, he went as far as the 10th grade, I believe, and my mom progressed to the 11th. My parents worked very hard, raising us as children, and they primarily went as far as they could from an educational standpoint, and they had begun to work in the factories to support their family.
Did both of them work in the factory?
They both worked in the factory. My father worked for a table company, which was Cleveland Table Company, for so many years. And my mother worked for a sewing company, which was Selma Apparel, for so many years. But right now they're both retired. And I guess
And enjoying life.
Trying to enjoy life.
Right. They still live in Selma.
They both still live in Selma.
Where are your brothers and sisters? Are they still in Selma?
I have a brother who's living in Montgomery, but 2 brothers who are presently living in Montgomery. I have a brother that is living out in El Paso, Texas. And I have 1 brother that's presently living in Selma. However, I have a sister that's living in Detroit, Michigan, and my oldest sister who's living in Atlanta, Georgia.
So you're somewhat scattered then.
Yes, we are scattered.
Do you have family reunions?
We have family reunions, but not as often as we used to. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of planning a family reunion coming up for the year 1998 this year.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You have it in Selma?
Yes, we will have it in Selma.
That's big business lately.
It is. Family reunions are great, but the whole agony of the planning aspect of it can become complex sometimes. But I think in spite of all that, it's a great thing to do when you can bring the family together and joy rather than sorrow, in which most families always come together for.
When you were growing up, your mother and your father were working. You started school, you were next to the baby. So all your brothers and sisters had gone before you. What do you remember about started first grade in Selma, and what school did you attend?
I attended Clark Elementary School, which was a school a couple of blocks over from where we lived in the George Washington Carver Project homes. I could vividly remember my childhood growing up at that time. First of all, me being in the first grade, or even in kindergarten, I was what you may call a unique or active child. And I just liked the fact of being involved. And even though I was poor, I was the type of child who wanted to be a part of some of the other things that I saw some others doing, but perhaps couldn't afford to.
Like what, for instance?
For instance, programs that took place at school, I always wanted to be out front or a part of it. And even though I did not necessarily know that I had a particular talent at that particular time, I just wanted to be a part of whatever was going on at school. And I would really try to execute my participation through my teachers. I could remember many times when I used to talk to my mom about me participating on a program. And of course, my parents always supported me with that. But there were a number of times where expenses had come into play. You know, everybody liked the idea of their children participating, but they always wanted them not only to do well, but to look good. And many times when my mom and my dad would express the idea of whatever my needs were, or my discussing that with them, if they didn't have it, I did not even hesitate to discuss this with my teachers. So that really didn't make a difference with me. I was just, as a child, I always wanted to be out front and be active.
And you were not bashful about asking people to assist you in doing whatever you needed to do.
Whether it was through my teachers, and primarily, and I really can attribute a lot to my teachers, as well as my parents, because they had the opportunities to get to know me well as a student, and as a, you know, based upon my track record with growing up in school from the first grade through the sixth grade, you know, it had become a thing where I didn't have to ask, they asked me. And of course, as I grew up from the first grade and on through the sixth grade, I could vividly remember me participating in a number of programs which really enhanced my development and personal growth. And it also made me become the person that I was, and I consider myself a very inquisitive type child. Many people often ask, well, how did you become involved in the civil rights movement at such an early age? And even though I didn't quite understand what was happening at that time, at that particular age, I was so inquisitive that I knew that something was happening unusual, and I wanted to be there. And as I grew in that movement, I became more knowledgeable of what was happening. And during that time, with all of the turbulence and the confrontations, the challenges and the changes that took place, and you being in the midst of it, you know, it wasn't like you just volunteered to do this. It was high risk. It was high risk for adults and even more for children. But even in spite of all of that, with what I saw, with what I heard during that time, and being right in the midst of it, I wanted to still be a part of that. So oftentimes, even being told or threatened by my parents, and even sometimes by my teachers, that I shouldn't have been there or I shouldn't go, I was determined to be there, and that I did. So you could call me a disobedient child at that time, but for that particular cause, based upon those circumstances at that time, I'm very appreciative, and I feel very fortunate to have done what I did as a child and to be a part of that history.
Even prior to getting involved in the movement, you sound as if you were outgoing, you didn't meet any strangers, and you were one of those children who would demand in a child's way that things would happen the way that you would want them to happen, or you would be involved. Say, for instance, if there was a play at school, you would want to be involved in that play. Are there individuals outside of the family that had an impact upon your involvement, teachers particularly?
I think there were several people who contributed to impacting my life in a most profound way. Not only as to me progressing attitude-wise, educational-wise, but I think in a real sense, even prior to the movement being active or becoming active in Selma, I think there was something very unique about my personality. Where it derived from, I couldn't really tell you. However, I do believe that the movement really elevated that particular element. And I say that because Dr. King impacted my life in a very, very significant way. First of all, I knew that I was poor. But even in spite of me being poor, Dr. King helped me to recognize that because I was poor, regardless of whether me being poor or not only me, but of those others who were unfortunate in some incidents, that I still could do what I wanted to do as long as I strived for that. And education was one of the things that Dr. King related to my best friend Rachel and I, who lived next door to me. At that particular time, I didn't know the true importance of it, but as constantly as he uttered those words to us each time that he talked to us, the more significant and the more I wanted, or the more I was motivated to want to go to college and want to finish high school. However, as I progressed and as I learned more and experienced more through the movement, I was one of the kids who went back to my instructors to let them know what was going on, because, of course, as my parents and so many others, along with my teachers, if they had become involved in the movement at that particular time, they would lose their jobs. But even again, in spite of me being disobedient, it was like I was the communicator between my families and my instructors as to what was going on, because I was there.
You had mentioned that as a young child, you really didn't understand what was going on. You knew that something was happening and that you needed to be involved in it. Prior to the movement, did you understand segregation? Did you understand the condition that the black community was in relative to the white community?
Well, in terms of understanding segregation to its fullest, I may not have as a child prior to the movement, but I knew the difference.
You knew what you should do and what you shouldn't.
I knew the difference between black and white.
Did you ever question?
I always questioned that. Many times when I had gone to the doctor's office with my parents and we had to sit on one side that always indicated blacks, and then of course on the other side it would indicate whites. Even with the water fountain, so many other circumstances that we read about today with various restaurants, even going to various stores and selling. I could remember that vividly, and I always questioned that. And even though I was given different responses at different times, I knew it was wrong. And as I grew in the movement, I had become very knowledgeable as to why that was happening. And that's one thing that really helped me to grow from an educational standpoint, as well as a reality standpoint, because being in the midst of it and meeting the challenges, as well as listening to Dr. Martin Luther King and so many other freedom fighters who had come to be a part of that movement and deal with the struggles of segregations and injustices, inequality at that particular time. Being a child it was something that didn't take overnight for you to really learn about it if you didn't know it. You could just see it. And each time that I was in the midst of it, of course, I had become to recognize and realize exactly what the movement was all about.
What are the events that stand out in your mind more than any others as it relates to your involvement?
I think let me just say this before I answer that. There were many experiences that I had that have stood out in my mind that would never leave me. But one of the incidents that happened that I'll never forget is the Bloody Sunday March.
Where were you on that march in relationship to the front of the march?
I was in the middle part of the march.
Were you on the bridge?
Yes, I
at the time
was.
that
I was actually, during that particular march, there were hundreds of people who marched on that particular day, but there were enough of people who could cover the bottom of the bridge and still overlap almost down to the bottom, and I was right in the middle, in the midst of the marchers.
Were you with any members of your family at that particular time, or do you remember who was right there with you? Because what was your age at the time?
At that particular time, I was approximately 7 years old. I was with the late Margaret Moore, who was one of the teachers who had the courage to participate at that particular time. Many threats had been made about the possibility of what would happen on that particular day. And even in spite of that, again, I was still determined with me being afraid, as so many others who were a part of that movement. I was still determined to be a marcher.
What were you afraid of?
I was afraid of what would happen. Prior to that time, with many instances, particularly at mass meetings, people spoke about how people would be beaten. And there had been some on other marches that had previously taken place who had been beaten or abused in some form or fashion. I heard that as a child on numerous occasions. However, this was the time that I knew in my mind that something would happen. And I was afraid because, first of all, I knew I wasn't supposed to be there as a child. And secondly, based upon the fervent faith, the way that people prayed, the way that they sung. And I'm not just saying just a prayer and they were finished with it. There were many instances that took place prior to that march. And it was what you saw in the midst of the people who were part of that movement on their faces. You saw fear on their faces, but yet at the same time, you saw determination, dedication, commitment. And I think that the people who were actually a part of that movement at that time, it didn't matter. You know, Dr. King said that, first of all, being in the midst of that movement, you had to have a certain commitment. You had to have a degree of a certain type of faith. You had to have a degree of willingness and to have something to sacrifice, even if it was your life. You know, and that is what I saw. That's what I saw people doing as a child. And the expressions, the spirits, the determination, those type attitudes, the attitude of readiness is really what taught me the most about the movement at that time. And I felt that whatever I knew that at that particular time as a child, I knew that first of all, it was a struggle between something right, something wrong that should be turned into right. And I wanted to be a part of it, not just for myself, but for my parents and for the people that lived in Selma. And that attitude started exuberating within me, just being in the midst of it, not understanding quite all of the ramifications that were involved. But I knew the difference. I knew the difference between, again, black and white, and I knew the difference between right and wrong, and I actually saw it. I not only, visualized it, I experienced it as a child every day.
What was that day like for a 7-year-old? What was the experience like? Can you explain what you saw? Why did you, at the particular time that you had to turn around, what did you do?
Well, it was scary. From the time that we were asked to mobilize ourselves in front of Brown's Chapel Church, there was some communication between me and the late Margaret Moore. And I had indicated to her that I wasn't gonna march. And I told her I wanted to, but I didn't have permission to. However, when the marchers had knelt down to pray, I remember standing on the sideline, being indecisive. Still with fear, not only for myself, but for them, particularly. And as they had gotten up and they had begun to march and start singing freedom songs, I remember running back up to her, joining her in the march, clenching her by her hand. I told her that I wanted to go. And she took my hand and I marched with her. And I could...
Was Rachel with you?
No, Rachel and I, my best friend, had discussed this. And of course, Rachel was not as, I guess I was more disobedient in a sense than Rachel. Sometimes she wanted to do some things that we had talked about as friends and as children, but she listened to her parents more. And I was basically the opposite. However, I could remember as we made our way to the Edmonds Pettus Bridge on that particular day, the closer we got to the bridge, the more frightened I had become as a child. And I could remember when we had reached the Edmonds Pettus Bridge, and of course we started praying. And after we were asked to turn around, all I could remember was tear gas that had begun to burst out into the air, and I could see hundreds of state troopers and policemen with billy clubs and tear gas masks, and troopers on horses. And when this tear gas had really started being burst and flammed into the air, I could just see people running. Of course, I started running, trying to make my way home. And I could see the horses, and at some point, as everybody was trying to run, and several people were running in different ways, but there were several people who were running in my direction, as if they were trying to make their way back to Brown's Chapel AME Church. And as I had begun to run, trying to make my way back home, I remember Reverend Hosea Williams picking me up, and my feet were still galloping in his arms. And I looked to him, and I told him to put me down because you're not running fast enough, in my own childish words. And there were some people along with Hosea who were still accompanying not only me, but those others who were frightened, trying to make their way home. But I remember getting home that particular day, and my parents were standing at the door along with so many other neighbors, because it was obviously that something was going to happen that day. And when we were running, trying to make our way back to Brown's Chapel Church, and myself trying to make my way back home, I could hear sirens, you know, the ambulance sounds, and people crying, and it was very frightening. I got home and my parents were standing in front of the door, and I just ran up to my door and ran completely through them and making my way up the steps. And my mom had come behind me, trying to comfort me, and I just cried. I was very frightened, and with what I saw and visualized on that particular day, I'll never forget it. It'll never leave my heart, neither my mind. That was the most traumatic experience of my life, particularly being a child.
Would you allow your children to be involved in a movement, if there was a movement going on of that nature today?
You know, I've been asked that question once before, and I believe if there is a given cause that would require the commitment and the dedication, and if they felt that it's something that they needed to do or wanted to do for that cause, even in spite of danger, I may do it reluctantly, but I believe I'll let them go.
7 years old.
At 7 years old. And I say that because I'm hoping that a movement will come now that will give not only young people that type of spirit or attitude, but people as a whole. We haven't had a movement like that since that time where people were united and came together for a given cause. Even though it took the Bloody Sunday March for us to really mobilize more people from all over the world. And in most, under most circumstances, it takes crisis situations and circumstances for us sometimes to realize really what is happening. And I'm very honest with you when I say that if at any point that I had children and there was a cause that came about that really would give them the attitude of wanting to be, or the attitude that I had in a sense, I would just be glad for that movement to come again, for children and people to mobilize themselves. And I think we have had so many reasons for that movement, even after the civil rights movement. Right now, for us to have that type of attitude. And based upon those circumstances, I would do that.
The book Selma Lord Selma suggests that there was a rather intimate relationship between yourself, Rachel, and Dr. King. Can you just describe to us what that relationship was? A 7-year-old child, and you had the opportunity to sit on this lab talking about me. What was that like?
As I mentioned to you earlier, there were so many experiences that I'll never forget. And one of those experiences was having the opportunity to meet Dr. Martin Luther King. And as I look at it today, you know, myself and Rachel, at that time being kids, we had no idea of what type of man or what type of person or the history that would come behind our experiences or being given the opportunity to meet him. But obviously, it struck a chord with us even at that age. And meeting Dr. King, anybody who has had the opportunity, adults or what have you, should feel very fortunate and grateful. But we were even more fortunate. First of all, Dr. King saw people regardless of what background or what walk of life that they had come from. He saw people or person just as they were. And that's how he treated us as he met us on that particular day. I remember Rachel and I playing in front of Brown's Chapel AME Church, and there were these cars that had driven up. And of course, it took our attention. And as they had gotten out of the cars, we went over towards them. And one of the men that was with Dr. King said to us, "Do you know who this man is?" And we had no inkling of who none of them were. So he said to us, "This is Dr. King." And of course, we didn't know who Dr. King was. So as they proceeded to go into the back of Browns Chapel AME Church, and they were about to have a meeting on that particular day, we followed them. And as we followed them, one of the men said to us, "Well, you all can go on now because we're about to have a meeting." And Dr. King immediately said to them, "No, let them stay." So we followed him on into the church. And as we got into the church, Dr. King had begun to give us some attention as children. He came over to where we were and he asked us our names. And of course, we gave him our names. And then he said, "What do you want?" And Rachel and I looked at each other, hunching our childish shoulders. And we didn't know how to respond to that question. And he asked us again, he said, "What do you want?" And we looked at each other again. He said, "When I ask you what do you want, your reply should be freedom." So he asked us again the third time. He said, "What do you want?" We said freedom in our own childish voices. He said, "Say it louder." So we said it louder. He asked us again, "When do you want it?" We didn't quite know how to answer that question. He said, "When I ask you when do you want it, you say now." So he asked us, "What do you want?" And we said freedom loudly. He said, "When do you want it?" And we said now. This was our first acquaintance with Dr. Martin Luther King. We sat there for a while, and after he had gone into his meeting, he told us he wanted to talk with us more. We left and we started playing like children would normally do. And we came back because we wanted to talk with him more. And when we had come back, Dr. King told us he was coming back to Selma and he wanted to see us. Now, even though we didn't quite know the significance of this man and really what he really represented at this time, but we knew that he was someone very important. And we couldn't wait to get home to talk to our parents about this. And I could remember talking to my parents about it, and they didn't have the expression on their faces that I thought that they should have had. And of course, I had to come to realize why, as I grew in the movement, because at that particular time, Dr. King was a profound leader that people didn't necessarily dislike, but they didn't like the idea of the disturbance that it could cause with them as a community or a people. And of course, Dr. King, with the leadership that he provided, not only in Selma, but all over the world, it intervened in so many ways with the agenda of people being concerned about their jobs, but yet he was fighting for them. In so many instances from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint. But of course, after having met Dr. King on that particular day, I couldn't wait to see Dr. King when he had come back to Selma. And there were many pamphlets that had gone around in our communities from SCLC announcing when Dr. King was going to be in Selma for the mass meeting. And of course, my parents didn't want me to be there. I didn't do a whole lot of discussion about it. I knew that I was going to be there. And I recall slipping out of my house on that particular evening. And I remember going into Browns Chapel AME Church and sitting on the front row and singing along with the people that were there, the various freedom songs. And
How far was your home from the church?
my home was right in the back of Browns Chapel AME Church, not far. It wasn't a half of a mile. But I remember Dr. King making his way to the pulpit there. I remember the people who were gathered sitting, clapping their hands and singing a freedom song, and all of a sudden everybody had begun to stand on their feet and look in one direction. And as they looked into that direction, there were a crowd of people who were following Dr. King as Dr. King made his way to the pulpit. And you could just see the gleam, not only in Dr. King's eye as he made his way to the pulpit, but if you just looked around, you could just see a certain spirit that was exuberating all over the church. And people had begun to clap their hands loud and even stomp their feet. And they went from one freedom song to "Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory of the Coming of the Lord." And they sung that song, and Dr. King just stood there. And every now and then he would raise his hand, and then when everybody had quieted down after Dr. Martin Luther King had taken his seat, everybody was just waiting for him to make his speech. And I'll never forget the first time that I had the opportunity to hear him speak. I didn't, again, quite understand all of the things that Dr. King talked about, but what I remember most about Dr. King was talking about the difference between injustices, black and white, and that in spite of people doing you wrong, you still have to turn the other cheek. And at that particular time, I couldn't really analyze it as I did maybe 6 or 7 months from that time. But I knew that he had a righteous heart and that he was coming there to start a movement to help people in Selma, whether they were black or white. And based upon the way that Dr. King spoke, you knew he had a very Christian-like attitude. And I knew at that particular night that I then was a part of the movement.
Were other members of your family involved?
No, they did not become involved until a later date when others had become more comfortable with joining the movement.
How many times do you remember seeing Dr. King or being in his presence? Were there many other times after this time?
Sure, there were many other times. Dr. King had, during that time, SCLC, of course, played an intricate role. And there have been several meetings at Brown's Chapel Church with the absence of Dr. King, and there have been many with his presence. And
Were you disappointed when they had something and he was not there?
very disappointed, but I always asked, when was he coming back? And those times that I knew he was going to be there, I would always be there. So there were many times that they had strategy meetings at Brown's Chapel Church. And those were the times that we had private time, in a sense, to really communicate with Dr. King. And a number of times when, in the midst of him doing what he had to do, he still took time to give us that attention. And he talked about education, us getting an education. Now, he asked us questions about our families a lot, but he always told us that he will be back and he wanted to see us. And every time that Dr. King would make his way back to Selma for the mass meetings, we had made it a point as children to make our way to the pulpit and sit on his lap.
Did you ever question why your parents were not involved?
I questioned that, particularly when I really didn't quite understand a lot of things. But of course, as I grew in the movement, I understood more about their reservations and so many other things. But it didn't take me long to recognize and realize, or even to be educated about the significance and the purpose of what the movement was all about. So I grew up fast in the movement, which made me become very more understanding as to the position that not only my family took, but others as well. And in a real sense, as I grew in that movement and as I had become a part of that movement, it was like I was not only in that movement for myself and for others, but particularly for my parents.
You were 9 or 10 when Dr. King was assassinated. Where were you when you heard the news?
I had come from a dancing class, and I remember making my way into the door, and my mama, my dad, and 4 other sisters and brothers were there, and they had their attention on the TV as I made my way through the door. But as soon as I had walked in, all of them turned their heads to me, and I saw this unique expression on their faces, and it displayed that something was wrong. And before I could really ask the question about what was wrong, there was a special bulletin that had come across the TV saying that Dr. King had died. And at that particular time, I had so many different mixed emotions as a child. The first thing that I did was, of course, cry. And I went to my room and I thought about all of the memories as a child with meeting Dr. King and some of the things that he taught me as a child. And I started writing about my path, Dr. King. And I guess in the midst of me dealing with my emotions at that particular time, of course, it was nothing that I really understood. I knew he was dead. I knew he was killed, and I knew it was wrong. And I'm not saying that I understood that death, but what I did understand was what Dr. King said. He would rather die for what he felt was right. And I remember him saying on a number of occasions, from the song, oh freedom, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And that's what Dr. King's commitment, that's what his sacrifice was all about. He talked about it, but I had no idea that it would happen that fast, because it was really like I was just really getting to know somebody who had instantly been killed in the struggle for fighting for us as a people and for the rights of humanity. And but that was the type of commitment that Dr. King had, and the sacrifices that were involved in it to that point. And that helped me, and as I continued to grow in the movement as a result of his death, that helped me to even realize even more of the importance of my doing my part and me having a commitment to serve in my community. And I think that that's one of the things that we as a people are lacking today. Based upon the commitment, the willingness, the visions that it takes to deal with some of the challenges that we're faced with in our community, and even as a nation, we're not willing to have that same type of genuine sacrifice and be willing to serve. And one of the prime examples with that, that I like to express to young people that I have the opportunity to speak to anywhere that I go, is exercising the right to vote and looking forward to that.
You, after Dr. King was killed, you keep saying when you grew up, you were growing up at that time, growing up in the movement. What kind of activities were you involved with after '68?
After '68, I was involved in various activities. For one thing, desegregation had come into play, which had an impact still on young people as well as adults in my community. My brothers and sisters, they all went to predominantly black schools. At that particular time, as I continued to grow in the movement, based upon what I had experienced, I was determined to go to a white school. I wanted to meet that challenge, knowing that I had that right and that I could face it. and I did that. In doing that, I was determined also not to just go to the school, but to be active. And at that particular time, it was very difficult if you were black going into a segregated school and wanting to be a part of something. It just wasn't anything that you possibly just had the qualifications for. You had to battle with the black and white issue, and it was an unfair system.
Were you one of the first to go into the white high school?
I was not the first, but I was among the few. And being among the few, there were a lot of hatred and so many other things that we had to contend with on a day-to-day basis. I could remember many times when my parents tried to support me in dealing with some of those problems where I was the only black in 5 of my classes. And of course, being the only black in 5 of my classes, I wasn't the type of student that just sat there because I was black. I was active, and I tried to exemplify my character and my personality, and showing them that I could be on the same level that they were.
Were you active in extracurricular activities?
I sure was. I had the opportunity to be a cheerleader. And I was among the few at that particular time who went out for cheerleader as a black, and that was quite difficult, but I made it. And even in spite of me making it, there were many times that I was spat on at different games, being called names, so many different things as it relates to racial barriers, but that still helped me to grow. And I think that because of that movement, it really contributed to me not only becoming more active, but more understanding. And I really didn't, even though I experienced a lot of prejudice, I didn't look at it from a hatred standpoint. I really just dealt with people just as they, dealt with me, the way that they dealt with me. Those who were cordial to me, I would be cordial to them in spite of.
What was the process of becoming a cheerleader?
Well, being a cheerleader for the YMCA, I was as I again grew up, I was a cheerleader for the YMCA, which was predominantly black, and then going to junior high school, trying out for a predominant white team. There were certain things that you had to execute from a physical standpoint. And in a real sense, to make it all clear, black folks had soul. And I had to actually train myself to take form as to the type of with the trials for getting through, making the cheerleader for that at that particular time. And it took some extensive training for me to go from one transition to another.
To mask some of your rhythm.
Right. And I did that, and I did it well, but even in spite of that, part of the process, first of all, was academics. You had to have a certain GPA. It was a screening process even before you did the practical part. And they tried to give me a very difficult time on that, but I made it through that after my parents had to come over a number of times. I had all of the qualifications, but there were many things that were put into place to keep me, to discourage me in a sense. But I was still determined. But when I even got to the practical part, of course, when you try out for cheerleading, you have an audience. And during that time, each time that I would come on the floor to try out, I was called names. There were many acts done to distract my attention, but I made it.
You were taking the place of some other young white girl. So that competition then created the division. What was your relationship with others on the team?
It was something that we had to grow through. Initially, it was distasteful, but based upon my attitude with adjusting, not only adjusting to being a part of that type of system, but adjusting them, because even though I knew that I was black and they were white and I knew the difference, I still had a cordial attitude and I still tried to blend. And initially there was one particular cheerleader that had more communication and interaction with me, and then it started trickling through the others. But I think I was a contributing factor with all of that, because if I had retaliated in any form or fashion, it would have defeated, my purpose totally. But that is what the movement of Dr. King taught me.
What were your teachers like?
Prejudice. They were.
You were the only black student in 5 of your classes.
In 5 of my classes. They were basically prejudice. I knew what my objective was at that time, and that was to really study hard and to try to complete my courses in spite of what I was experiencing in the course of that. And many times I did have problems with some of my courses, but it wasn't a thing where I could go to them perhaps and get the type of assistance that I needed. I had to go elsewhere. And but I kept in my mind that I needed to complete that course or those courses. It was difficult at times, and the experience that had come from that really motivated me more.
Did you ever consider going back to the black high school?
No, it never crossed my mind. As a matter of fact, I wanted to become more active, and I did. I became a member of the choir. I became a member of the basketball team, the volleyball team. I even was very interested in becoming a member of the debate team, but I couldn't mix it in with the other extracurricular activities that I had. It really motivated me more.
Did your younger brother, did he go to the same high school?
Yes, he did, but at a later time. He during the time that I had gone to Parish High School, there were other options for blacks, and at that particular time he was at the predominantly black school. However, when more blacks had really started going to the school, and when it had become a better situation, of course he was among those numbers.
After high school, why did you not decide to go to Alabama or Auburn?
My first choice was the University of Alabama. And because I wanted to be a cheerleader, that was one of my pet peeves. I knew wherever I went, I wanted to be a cheerleader. And I had some difficulties with getting through that program. And for some reason, they just didn't want a black. And because of the difficulties that I had extracurricular-wise, and with me focusing on that, with being a part of my academics, I chose to go to Tuskegee.
What was that experience like?
It was a great experience. I think I had the opportunity with being a part of the movement having the opportunity to go, to be a part initially of a desegregated system, then having the experience of going to a predominantly black college, it taught me a lot. And being at Tuskegee, I tried to really take what I had because of what I experienced in the movement and growing up. I wanted to use every talent that I had, and I did that, which really enhanced my personal growth, mentally and socially. As a student at Tuskegee, my first year as a freshman, I got involved with student government, and not only my freshman year, from freshman year through fourth year of college, of graduating, and being a part of numerous activities there. It helped my personal growth, and I had mixed emotions in the process because for some reason I had the idea of coming back home, getting into politics, because when I had initially thought about my major, of course it was political science. However, as I participated in various events, and I was not only involved on the campus, I was also involved in the community as a student. And as I
What
had,
kind of involvement in the community?
I was involved in, well, first of all, being a member of student government there really gave me an opportunity to meet several people in the community on all levels. And in the community, there was the Community Action Agency, and they had different programs. I started off with, assisting with tutoring, some of the kids. In City Hall, they had various programs there. I had become a member of the NAACP chapter there. I started working with young people. And it really became my pet peeve in a sense. And ultimately, I changed my major. I decided that I wanted to go into social work. And as I completed my college education, I decided that I would return home with the possibility of still having some interest in politics. However, as I had grown older and as I had become more involved in a sense with becoming more knowledgeable of politics, I decided I didn't think that at that time that would be something that I would be interested in. But I did know that I was interested in youth, and I was more of a youth advocate than anything else. So I took that interest, and with the talents and skills that I had, I decided that I wanted to develop a youth program. And as I had come to Montgomery in 1980 to further my education, I really started looking at that, and I found Keep Production, which is KEEP, an acronym for Keep Entertaining Everyday People. And my whole concept with that idea was to really focus and concentrate on the less fortunate youth and reach out to them to help build self-esteem and to use their talents or the God-given talents that they have to help motivate them in building self-esteem. And had no inkling of how I would really do that, but I mobilized a group of young people in Montgomery. And my first event was a talent show, and I organized that particular talent show, and I went out into several project of poor housing areas, and I recruited some kids who had various talents and also went in some other areas. And I recruited some kids. And as a result of that show, particularly being my first time doing it, it was very successful. And I decided that I would do another one. And as a result of me continuing to do that, with the idea and the vision that I had with focusing on youth, it really escalated quicker than I had anticipated. So now, after 17 years, that worthiness of that program has been proven. I have had the opportunity to meet and work with hundreds of young people from all walks of life in building self-esteem, as well as providing various workshops, which has encouraged them to go on and finish high school as well as college. And even today, I still have that program.
Was that part of Alabama State?
No, it's not. It's not a part of Alabama State. This is something I started doing prior to being employed at Alabama State University.
How was it funded?
Self-sufficient. There were many opportunities for me to become incorporated, but I decided that based upon the way in which the program was being handled, I had to support many businesses and parents through the years, and I wasn't quite stable in terms of me holding on to that program as long as I have. And when the idea of becoming incorporated was being handed down to me, I just wasn't comfortable with that idea at that time. But the program has survived well, being self-sufficient. We have to, anything that we do, we have to go out and get the funds for. However, we, in many instances, with various things that we wanted to do, particularly with workshops, bringing resources in, or even putting on various shows, we've had a lot of support from the community.
This program has been in force since 1980?
Since 1980.
And did you work with that program full-time prior to getting going on board with
I did.
AM?
I did. I was employed at Alabama State in 1991. And prior to that time, I was, my attention was basically given to keep production.
So now what do you do at AM?
At Alabama State University,
I'm sorry.
I'm coordinating student activities. My job is basically to coordinate and manage various student activities for the student body. I work in conjunction not only with Student Government Association, but also with various committees of the university and with Miss Alabama State University in our court.
You had the opportunity to share your experiences growing up with students at Alabama State, and if you have, what has been the reception?
I've had many opportunities to share my experiences with students, and as much as over the years you get new students to come in and others to go out, most of it has been a big surprise. There are students there now who come to me on a regular basis wherever they hear about the book, because I don't make it a point to advertise the success of my book. And it's not so much because I'm modest about it. It's just that I feel that at some given point, the students will recognize the fact that I was a part of that movement. And that is beginning to happen more and more. I've had the opportunity to speak to the student body on three occasions. However, in various classroom settings from various instructors, I get the opportunity to go. So that alone helps spread the news about my experiences as a child. But sometimes it's amazing to them. They want to sit down and they really want me to go in depth with them. But one of the things I always encourage them to do is first to read the book and then come ask me questions about it. Oftentimes when I do have the time, I would sit and I would entertain questions. But right now, with this book being 15 years old, the book is still alive, and I'm very thankful for that. And there have been many opportunities that have been prevailed for me to again speak to young people across the country. And a lot of times when you're doing that and you're focusing on your personal life and your job, a lot of emphasis is not placed in your own community. And even though I have had the opportunity to speak to a number of students at various elementary, junior high schools in Montgomery, I'm still awaiting of the opportunity to reach out more to other students. And I do have other plans to speak to students at Alabama State University. As a matter of fact, I'll be speaking in February on 3 occasions.
Is the book in paper right there?
Yes, it is.
Have you had any opportunity to speak here at the Institute?
This is my first
First
opportunity.
time? We'll have to get that out, so we can get you back and have some programming around what you're doing. So I think it's very significant. I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule, because this obviously is a piece of history that every child should know, because what it does, it gives other people the strength to know that even at the age of 7, 6, 7, 8, that you had the audacity to question the status quo. And that is, I think, you should be commended for that. So again, thank you for coming.
Thank you so very much for inviting me.